The horrible death of Henry VIII, a king devoured by his own body. Subscribe to the channel Lived History and leave a like on the video. His absolute power, his cruelty and fate led him to a death so gruesome that history barely dares to remember it. Henry VIII, England's most feared monarch, did not meet a glorious end on his deathbed. His rotting body, unbearable stench, and a terrifying foreboding marked his final days. Here, we bring you the story as it has never been told before. Henry VIII of England, born in 1491, was a monarch who defined the destiny of his nation with his turbulent personal life, his break with the Catholic Church, and his ruthless decisions. However, what many people ignore is that his death was not worthy of a king, but a slow and disgusting agony that reflected the consequences of his excesses and brutality. In his youth, Henry VIII was a strong and athletic man, but his body began to deteriorate after an accident at a tournament in 1536. During a joust, his horse fell on him, leaving him unconscious for 2 hours. Although he recovered, the wound on his leg never fully healed. From that time on, his health began to deteriorate. The wound turned into an open ulcer that constantly festered, emitting an unbearable stench. It is said that the courtiers had to endure the terrible odor while the king remained at court, hiding his grief behind a facade of power and ferocity. Furthermore, his temper became even more volatile, eliminating anyone who dared to challenge him, such as his second wife, Anne Boleyn, executed in 1536, and his fifth wife, Catherine Howard, beheaded in 1542. As the years passed, Henry gained weight at an alarming rate. In his youth, he was over 6 feet tall and muscular, but in his later years he weighed over 280 pounds. His legs could barely support him, and gangrene began to spread to his wounds. In 1543, he married his sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr. By this time, his health was in ruins. His body was covered in sores. He suffered from episodes of extreme paranoia, and he had difficulty moving without assistance. Despite his condition, Henry continued to rule with an iron fist, ordering executions and making military decisions that further weakened his kingdom. The court physicians attempted to treat him with rudimentary methods such as smelly ointments and bandages soaked in herbs, but nothing could stop the progression of the disease. The ulcers on his legs grew deeper and deeper, oozing pus and blood. He often cried out in pain and ordered that no one should look at him as he suffered in his bed. The last years of his life were marked by frustration and despair. His mind became increasingly unstable, and he became convinced that everyone around him wanted to poison or betray him. But the worst was yet to come. His death would be slow, terrifying, and steeped in suffering. In his final months, his body was ravaged by obesity, gout, diabetes, and a chronic leg infection. His stench was so nauseating that few could bear to be near him. It is said that his room was constantly perfumed with aromatic herbs, and that servants would come in with handkerchiefs soaked in vinegar to resist the smell. In his final days, the monarch could barely speak. His breathing was labored and difficult, and his once imposing face was swollen and pale. Although it was obvious that he was dying, no one at court dared to utter the word death, since according to the superstitions of the time, declaring the end of a king before it happened could be considered treason. On the night of his death, Henry VIII was delirious and muttering incoherent words. Some witnesses claimed that he called out to his executed wives as if their ghosts were haunting him. In his final moments, his breathing became more and more irregular, until in the early hours of January 28th, his heart stopped beating. But the story doesn't end there. The death of Henry VIII was only the beginning of an even more macabre episode. Because of his enormous size, the king's body had to be transported in a special coffin. The transfer was delayed, and the corpse began to decompose rapidly. It is said that, while his coffin was in Sion Abbey, a gruesome thing happened. The fluids from his rotting body began to seep through the coffin. According to contemporary accounts, a stray dog approached and licked the fluids dripping from the king's coffin. By the time the funeral finally took place, the image of the once powerful monarch had been reduced to that of a bloated and pestilential corpse. He was buried in St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, next to his third wife, Jane Seymour, the only one who had borne him a son, Edward VI. Henry VIII's death was neither noble nor glorious, but the result of years of excess, illness, and ruthless decisions. Despite his horrific end, his legacy lived on. His daughter Elizabeth II would lead England into its golden age, but Henry VIII's name would forever be associated with the image of a king feared in life and remembered with horror in death. Thus ended the life of one of the most infamous monarchs in history, not with greatness, but with an unbearable stench and an end unworthy of his crown. That's all for today. Let me know what you think of this historical event about the death of Henry VIII. Write it in the comments. See you next time. Bye.